Hey folks, welcome back to Bakekat Kitchen. We've been trying really hard in the Bakekat house to minimise our waste in any way possible. And one of the things we're especially focused on is avoiding food waste wherever we can. Both Mrs Bakekat and I grew up in environments where we faced food insecurity on the reg as children. And working closely in and with community organisations, we are very cognisant of the challenges faced by people today around the availability of nutritious food at reasonable cost. We do a lot of meal prep to make sure we're both eating well, even when the last thing we feel like doing is cooking at the end of a busy day. And we aim to minimise food waste wherever possible. Managing my autoimmune conditions has also meant transitioning to an almost completely plant-based diet. I'm focusing on eating food with the bare minimum of processed elements in order to reduce the stress on my system and to give it good fuel to stay healthy. Making my own bread has been such a great part of this process. I love bread, but I definitely felt it physically if I ate the regular type that you get from the store. I found that anything containing processed ingredients and chemicals affected my gut and ramped up my overall inflammation, which was definitely not fun. With the sourdough and related products that I make at home, however, this just doesn't happen. I often like to make more sourdough starter than I need, so that I can use it for discard recipes. For those of you who don't know, discard just refers to the starter left over when you're making your bread. You only need a small amount to save and feed for your next bake, so sometimes the leftover just goes in the bin. I like to avoid wasting it if I can, and one of my favourite things to do is to whip up a batch of sourdough discard crackers. I love a savoury cracker, but again, the store-bought ones, as much as I loved them, are just not the best for me to eat anymore. These simple snack crackers hit the spot. I've got a couple of go-to recipes, but today I'm trying a new one. So again, we're on this experimental journey together. The ingredients that we're using is, we have 1 cup. These are US measurements, so 227 grams of sourdough starter discard, 120 grams of all-purpose flour. I'm just using my baking flour I use for my bread. 2 cups of shredded cheddar cheese, 2 tablespoons of softened butter, and just half a teaspoon of salt. So what we're going to do is mix all those ingredients together until we get a soft dough, which we're just going to portion up, wrap it in plastic and pop it in the fridge for half an hour before rolling it out, cutting it up and popping it in the oven. So I've just put the salt in with the flour here, and we're going to add the cheese, the softened butter. It's kind of a little bit melty as well, but it's quite a cool day here today, so I had to pop it in the microwave for a few seconds just to get it nice and soft. And of course, most importantly, our sourdough discard. I'm going to start mixing this with a spatula, and then I'm going to go in and just knead it with my hands to get it all together. Being a bit of a chilly day, as I mentioned, the sourdough starter itself is a little stiff, so I'm more than likely going to be able to mix it better just with my hands. As I mentioned though, it's the first time I'm making this, so I'll see how successful it is. So according to the recipe, this is going to give us a nice cheesy cracker. You could also add like garlic salt, maybe like ground garlic, dried garlic. I wouldn't use garlic salt because you're going to get them too salty. Or onion powder, garlic powder, that's what I was looking for. So this is a pretty stiff dough, which is why I think they want you to rest it for a while before rolling it out and portioning it and popping it into the oven. If you're using recipes, I got this recipe from Pinterest, and I'm always more likely to use a recipe that also has a metric conversion from the US conversion, because generally what we would consider a cup here in Australia is significantly different to what they would call a cup in the US. So try and find the recipes that have a metric conversion if you are in a metric country, so that you don't end up being wildly over or underestimating the amount of any particular ingredient that you need. So after quite a bit of wrangling, a few minutes of kneading, I've incorporated all the ingredients into the dough, and we are going to just wrap it in some Glad wrap and pop it into the fridge for 30 minutes just to let that dough rest a little. And hopefully, with a bit of luck, make it easier to roll out into nice thin crackers. Okay, our sourdough discard cracker dough has been in the fridge for about half an hour, just chilling down, and I've taken it out and I've cut the dough in half because we want to roll it out into approximately, the recipe says 1/16 of an inch, so using my conversion tool online, that's about 1.5 millimeters. It's pretty thin, but that sourdough discard is going to give it a little puff in the oven, so that's where we want to go with it. I sprinkled a little bit of flour on the baking paper that I have here. That's just the size of the tray that I'm going to use, and I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of flour on top so that my rolling pin doesn't stick to it. Like I said, it's not really a sticky dough, it's quite dense, so we'll see how we go. After I've rolled it out, we're going to brush it with a little bit of olive oil just across the top and sprinkle. The recipe did say to sprinkle it with some more salt, but I don't want to make these too salty. So for this batch, the first batch, I'm going to just sprinkle some sesame seeds on top because I love the taste of sesame seeds. These are toasted sesame seeds I just got from my Asian grocer. And we'll see how they go. And then once they come out of the oven, we'll have a taste. And maybe I'll amend the second half of the dough, which I put back in the fridge for the time being, and add a bit more salt. But I feel like the cheese is salty enough, and we did put half a teaspoon of salt in the dough as well. So you want to get this nice and thinly spread out, because you want a nice thin crispy cracker in a vaguely rectangular shape. So it's not a very sticky dough, as you can probably see. I'm not having any problems with the rolling pin sticking to it. I'm really looking forward to seeing how these turn out. Like I said, this is not a recipe I haven't used before. It's not my normal sourdough discard cracker recipe, but I have a feeling it's going to be super tasty. You want to get it nice and even as well in terms of thickness so that they cook evenly in the oven. We'll have to keep an eye on it when it goes in there as well, simply because the crackers that are on the outer edges will cook a little quicker, and you don't want them burning. Try and keep it on the confines of the baking paper that you've measured to the tray you're going to use. And as you can probably see, this bears only a very vague resemblance to a rectangle. But we'll get there. Things don't have to be perfect to be tasty. And it looks quite even in terms of thickness. I couldn't tell you if that's 1.5 millimeters, but it looks like a fairly good thickness for a cracker. You don't want them to be doughy, you want them to be crisp. So, just a little bit of olive oil that we're going to brush over the top. You don't want to go overboard. Start with less, because you can always add more, but there's no way you're taking this off. Well, I suppose you could put some paper towel on it and that would absorb some, but you get where I'm going with this. You don't want to put too much on it, I don't think, because you just don't want it to be, you don't want them to be greasy. You want them to be light and crispy and cheesy and delicious. And you're already going to get some of the fat rendering out of that cheese as it cooks. I think that's pretty good. Now, as I said, I'm going to sprinkle some toasted sesame seeds on top. I've preheated the oven to 170 degrees Celsius. I have a fan forced oven, and the recipe said to preheat your oven to 350 Fahrenheit. Now that's about 180 degrees Celsius, but I bring it down a little bit. Generally with a fan forced oven you'd bring it down 20 degrees Celsius lower, but as I've mentioned in previous videos, the temperature gauge on my oven is a little bit random. So I'm looking at about 170 degrees and I'm going to keep a close eye on it. It's going to go in for 15 to 20 minutes, but I'm going to watch it like a hawk. Because, like I said, new recipe, I don't know how quickly it'll cook, and my temperamental oven can be temperamental. Before we put it in, I'm just using a pastry cutter that I picked up. It cost me $10, Kitchen Warehouse, because I want to give it these serrated edges, serrated sides. So we're just going to be really careful, because I've never used one of these before either, frankly. And obviously I didn't get it into a complete rectangle. So what we're going to do is, we're not going to get rid of any of these. These little irregular side ones are going to just be just as good. But I'm also going to create a rectangle. But if they're not perfect squares, that doesn't make them any less tasty. So I'm going to make the crackers about 1 inch by 1 inch, so 2.5 centimeters by 2.5 centimeters. Again, I'm just eyeballing that. But remember, the more consistent you can make them in size, the more consistent the bake is going to be in terms of time. If you wanted to be super particular about this, you could measure it, I guess. My baking mat here does have measurements on it, but I don't know. No one's ever complained in the Bakekat household if something was a little irregular, that's for sure. And we'll get our tray. And fingers crossed this goes on the tray without too much drama. There we go. So into the oven, as I said, for 15 to 20 minutes, although I'm going to be keeping an eye on them because, new recipe. so we'll see what comes out. Well, I am pretty happy with how these have turned out. The second batch I put sprinkled some garlic powder on top of them as well, and to be honest I think they're my favourite out of these, although the ones with the sesame seeds also taste amazing. They've got a really nice flaky texture to them, and they're yum. They're really yum. As we wrap up today's episode, I hope you're feeling inspired to try out this recipe and continue exploring ways to create delicious, simple dishes. It's incredible how much impact our food choices can have, not just on our physical health, but also on our mood, energy levels, and overall well-being. By paying attention to what we're putting into our bodies, we're investing in ourselves in so many ways. It's also important to be mindful of the bigger picture when it comes to food. Making the most of what we have, avoiding waste, and choosing ingredients that nourish us are all small but meaningful steps towards a healthier and more balanced life. Whether you're cooking on a tight budget or experimenting with new ingredients, remember that eating well doesn't have to be expensive. It's about making the best choices with what you have. So as you go forward, I encourage you to be thoughtful about your food choices, not only for your health, but for your peace of mind. A balanced diet will fuel your body, lift your spirits, and even boost your productivity. If you've enjoyed joining me today and would like to see more of my cooking/life adventures, don't forget to subscribe. I'd love for you to join me. Have a great day, be generous with yourself and others, and I'll see you next time in Bakekat Kitchen.